Hi, this is Robert Middleton. Thanks for tuning into the Ordinary Visionaries interview with Joanne Lee. And it's a great interview about the creative process and creating things in your life. And she has a step-by-step process and a book that she wrote about this, which is very good. And I'm just doing this intro to warn you a bit that there's a few technical difficulties on this, mostly in the sound here and there, where you get a little static, etc. That just happens. So don't let that put you off, because there's so much value in this. So listen, put up with the imperfections, and I think you'll really find it valuable. So on to the interview. Hello, Joanne Lee, and welcome to Ordinary Visionaries. I'm so glad
Hello.
to have you here on a topic that I am really interested in. So tell us, how are you an ordinary visionary?
It's so great to see you, Robert. We go back a long way, although we haven't necessarily had contact in between, but it's great to reconnect. So I would say I'm an ordinary visionary in the sense that I think I came in this lifetime as a visionary. And of course, I didn't identify that way when I was younger, but probably in my 30s, I think I had been already creating visions, but in my 30s, I ran across Robert Fritz's work, Technologies for Creating.
Familiar with that? Oh,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
I got very excited
The
because
path of least resistance.
yes, yeah. And so here was this highly creative, he was a composer, musician, and also worked in organizations. And he had his curiosity led him to try to figure out how is it that we create. And of course, one of the big elements for any creation is starting with a vision, having a vision. So I did his work and studied with him for a while. He was one of my first mentors. So vision has been woven
Huh.
into kind of everything that I have done and do since then. Yeah. And I share his, both his, like I call myself a high creative. That's the term I use for people that can't help but create. So it doesn't, I like to make a distinction between creating and creativity. So I think we're all creators, but a lot of people don't identify as being creative, and that's fine. Like, you don't have to identify that way. And I think that's sort of the least important part of it. But we all create. Everyone creates, whether it's a fabulous meal or a gorgeous garden or a business or a job or a relationship. Like, we are creators.
So what is the work that you do to support people in being creators or being creative?
Well, it started really, I sort of found my groove in the late 90s, and that's when I encountered your work. Um, in that I became a business and personal coach. And so this was very early on when coaching was just in its infancy. And I discovered coaching through an article. I don't even remember what the magazine was. And, ironically, I had a partner at the time that was casting about for a new profession. We were in our late 40s. And I took it home to him and said, "Hey, this sounds like you. You listen well, you like people, you're service oriented." And he said, "Oh, cool." And he set the article aside. And about a month later, I said, "Hey, what about that coaching thing? Are you going to check that out?" And he was like, "Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah." A month later, nothing happened. And finally it dawned on me, oh, I wanted to do that. That was me. And it was such a perfect fit for me that, you
That's
know, the truth is that I had been coaching for a long time, but I had been doing it with no training, not much skill. I had been doing it without asking permission, and I had been doing it without getting paid. So, my friends would be in a dilemma and I would go into coach mode.
so that
So,
was your apprenticeship, right?
yeah, well,
Just
yeah. The school of
the friend who becomes a coach.
Yeah, yeah. So I got the training. I got the training and developed the skill set, and got selective. Didn't coach people without their permission, and started to build a practice. And then encountered your work and built my natural coach website based on your model. And, you know, I'm a little embarrassed to say
Oh, wow.
I don't refresh it very often, but it has stood the test of time, you know, even with all the trends that come
Yeah.
and go, it's still super useful, valid, easy to navigate, full of information. Yeah. So that got me launched on that career. And then around the same time, I guess I had joined a um, small group of women that were meeting like monthly, maybe twice a month sometimes, to write. And it was writing that was different than anything I had done before. So I had done academic work. I've got 2 bachelors and a master's, and I'd done lots of academic writing. And I'd done business writing, which was very comfortable. But I never saw myself as a creative writer of any sort. I never did. I mean, I journaled, I guess, a little bit, but um, my creative expression has always been visual. So this was a revelation to me because something very unusual was happening when we got together in these groups. And the woman that was teaching us or leading the group had a couple of steps in her process that enabled us to kind of get out of our usual state of, you know, monkey mind thinking and write from a deeper place. So she,
How would you define monkey mind thinking? Not everyone's familiar with that.
yeah, so I'm going to get a little nerdy because I'm talking about the beta brain. And the beta brain is our conscious waking state when right now, you know, we're generating beta brain waves. We're talking, we're thinking, we're assessing, we're judging. So we spend a lot of time in beta, very useful brain wave. Monkey mind is when it gets a little bit higher frequency and a little bit more frantic, and you know, maybe we're ruminating or we're getting anxious or we've got thoughts pinging all over the place. So all of that disappeared in this
Right.
process. So anyway, Dion moved away, and a friend and I, who was a writer by profession, wanted to keep this thing going and kind of do something with it. So we created the 7-step process, and the acronym CREATE with an exclamation point is each of the 7 steps. And we started teaching it, and people loved it. So we did, you know, weekend work.
And so you offered that as a class or one-on-one coaching on
Yeah,
that or both?
yeah, we were doing groups. So there were 2 of us, and we would do, you know, a 6-week group or a month-long group or a weekend workshop. Then we started extending it to, we did year-long groups where people were so enlivened by this experience that they wanted to do it regularly. And like anything, any
Wow.
practice, it's hard to get into the habit, right? Going to the gym, meditating, you know, eating well, whatever. So we helped folks by
Yeah.
providing that kind of support and accountability. So that went on for a few years, and we worked really well together. And we decided, you know, this is a natural evolution. I'm sure you'll recognize this. We decided, oh, we should write a book, a how-to book. So people that maybe aren't
Sure.
here, this was all pre-internet, right? So people that aren't here in Olympia, Washington, can learn this on their own. So we decided we're going to write the book, and we started. But you know, we just got bogged down pretty quick. We were in it, I don't know, maybe a year, maybe it was even 2 years, and we weren't making progress. And finally, my friend came to me and said, you know, my heart is not in this. I don't really want to write the book. I want to write my own books. Like, she had her own material that was coming through, and she wanted to, and she's a poet, and she wanted to be immersed in that. And she said, how would you feel if I just handed this to you? And I said, great. I would love that. You know, I think I can do it. And then I got bogged down because I'm a partner person, and, you know, a team. I like being on a team. So solo, it took me another couple of years before I was able to kind of birth this book. And the first version of it was a spiral bound, you know, printed locally. And I
Oh, yeah.
started offering my own workshops and groups and such. So then I had it published. I guess that was 2014, 2021. I published the version that you have, and then I just got it up on Amazon and Kindle. So the slow evolution.
Yeah. Well, sometimes it takes that.
Yeah.
So Joanne, so great job. You got the book written, took a while, and I've looked at it and it's really comprehensive. And you've got 7 parts to it. And I love systems or things where you've got, I don't know how you had to shoehorn that in, but it's create, commit, remove barriers, explore intentions, activate brainwaves, and think bilaterally, engage, and finally integrate. So that's the exclamation point at the end, integrate. Yeah, very clever. Um, so let's start with commit. Tell us about, and when it comes to creating, what do you mean by commit?
Yeah. So commitment, the big C is so important in life in general, right? It's like it's nothing much happens until we commit. We commit to a job, a career path, a partner, a project. And so, in this case, it's both commit to learning this process, give it some time, and, the big commit. And then
Yeah,
it's also the little c commit. Each time we write, we commit to spending 30 minutes or an hour, whatever it happens to be. So the commitment operates at different levels. Ultimately, for me, and I think for people who stick with this, the commitment is about personal transformation, being the best that they can be.
I really like what you say about committing to little things because, like in my project that I'm doing now with Ordinary Visionaries, there's a lot of things I've committed to it. And then sometimes it's like, oh, what's next? And it's like, well, it's just the next step. Commit to that little step, taking that action, sending that email, doing this, doing that. And after a while, it takes on a momentum. So without commitment, you don't have anything.
Yes,
So I
exactly.
get that. So what have you found in working with people where they struggle with this area of commitment?
Yeah, great question. So often they don't stick around. They're sort of intrigued with this notion of accessing depth, creativity, and divine guidance, but they're not willing to put in the work. It's like deciding, yeah, I want to be strong, but I'm not willing to go to the gym or I'm not willing to lift weights. So, and commitment it has its peaks and valleys, like everything in life. So, somebody can commit to this, practice it, and then they might fall off for a while, but they know the power of the tool and they'll come back to it.
Right. Yeah, I'm doing a kind of a low key exercise program now, and I think the commitment is really finally kicked in, but it's doing it at least every other day to strengthen some parts of my body.
Mm-hmm.
It's always a struggle, but I do have that commitment. Okay, so let's look at the next piece of the puzzle, which is interesting and often the biggest issue is removing barriers, which
Mm-hmm.
which which you assume that there are barriers. There's things in the way.
Mm-hmm.
So what are the most common barriers to creating what you want, and how do you remove them?
Yeah. So there are always barriers in the way, but even if somebody thinks there aren't, whenever we start something new, I call it trouble at the border. It's like stuff shows up, whatever we need to learn or however we need to grow or change, it's going to be up. So, in terms of this process, I list 105 barriers, and there are many more.
105? That's a lot.
Well, we don't all
So
have
you
them
can
all.
go through that list. You go, oh yeah, that's mine. That's mine. I'm familiar with that one. We don't have all the barriers, obviously.
Right. We don't have all of them all at the same time. And some of them we may never have. I list personal, organizational, and cultural. And they're barriers to creating. And so, you asked what are the most common ones. Often it's like, well, I'm not creative, or I don't have the time, or I don't have the space. It's the same kind of litany that we hear around why I don't go to the gym, why I don't eat better, why my relationship's not better.
Yeah. So can you give me an example of somebody that you worked with that really came up against a barrier, and how did you help them through that to remove that barrier?
Well, the first example that comes to mind is I can give you an early on in the process example and a more recent one. The early on in the process example was a
Okay.
PhD student who was not writing her dissertation. She got everything else done and she was stuck. So, in some ways it was a classic, writer's block. And so I didn't help her through that. Her own internal guidance and this process helped her through that. So it wasn't about me even necessarily coaching
Great.
her, about her using this process and writing intentions. We haven't gotten to that step, but writing intentions to address that block. And then a recent example is a good friend of mine who's an artist, and she had produced a body of work, like maybe a dozen prints, and she needed titles for them. And I suggested, and she's been a create writer for a long time. I suggested, hey, you can use this process. The intention would be give me my titles. And so she wrote this piece. It happened to be in a group setting. And what we do is we write and then we read out loud. And so she read her piece and she's like, I didn't get anything. And everybody else in the room was like, yes, you did. They're all there. And so we helped her find, she ended up calling the body of work praise songs. So that was one of the phrases in her writing. And then, 11, 12 more titles came from that.
So she had a sort of a breakthrough, and they all just sort of poured in, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And what comes through often comes through in metaphor, allegory. It's not, again, as we were talking earlier, it's not so much from beta mind, which is very clear and direct and recognizable. So it takes a little bit to decode the messages.
Right. So so you say there's a process of removing barriers. And I know of some, like the Byron Katie process is a way of removing barriers by questioning your beliefs. So what's the core of your process of removing barriers so that, because, when we have a barrier, we don't think it's in our mind. We think it's real. It's like, I can't do that because of X, or this will happen if I do that, or that. As you said, there's a zillion of them. So
Mm-hmm.
how does that, I know you can't give us everything here. We're not doing a class, but just to give a sense of what is it that seems to be most useful in removing those barriers?
In a way, it is very much like Katie's process. So I also use her process in other environments. And you go through this limiting belief and you imagine in her process, who would I be without that belief? Right. And then you do the
Right.
turnaround. So say, let's take our PhD student. So her belief might have been, I have writer's block, or it might have been, I'm not capable of writing my dissertation, or, who knows? I don't know what it was at the time, but whatever that was, when we create the intention, so now we're oozing over into step 3. When we create the intention, we always state it in the positive, in the present tense, and often with an I am lead to the statement. So she might have created something like, I write with ease, or I complete my dissertation easily and joyfully, something like that. And then her writing is going to bring forth how that's true and how it's not true. So she's going to get her own internal guidance for what to do next.
Right.
And sometimes an intention can be, give me the next step in creating my dissertation, in finishing my dissertation.
Okay, great. So let's look at the third one, which is explore intentions. So explore intention. What do you mean by that?
So this is where we start when we're using the create process. We start with, for every, what I call a write, for every session, we start with an intention. And if I'm working with a group or even an individual, we'll spend some time exploring, like, what's up in your life? What are you wanting to create? What's in the way? Where are you stuck? You know, what's moving and working well? So I get a sense and they get a sense, they talk a little bit. And then I have, again, a bunch of intentions at the back of the book for people to kind of spark their imagination. Sometimes one of them will actually be a perfect fit for them in the moment, but often it needs a little bit of reworking to be their voice, because it needs to be their voice. And again, it's
Right.
They're short, they're clear, they're simple, they're stated in the positive, they're stated in the present tense, not someday I will have a dissertation finished, but my dissertation is finished, or something like that. And they're strong, like like I can always tell when I'm working with somebody kind of when we've hit it, because it creates a resonance. They're like, oh, that's it. That's the one. That's what I need to, intend. Sometimes we use the other form that can be used is a give me. So give me the next step, or give me the meaning of my dream last night, or give me the meaning of this experience, such and such. So it can be a declarative also.
Do you find that intentions can be closely related to visualization, seeing the results? I mean, I often think of an intention as a word like I will be successful or whatever, but that's not quite as powerful as seeing myself doing it successfully in the future, And so, I see myself doing that. And then you sort of move towards that. So do you talk much or work much with visualization of your goal?
We don't actually. I do a visualization after the intentions are set to get people into the proper awakened mind state, but it's not about the completion of their goal. But you're right. Any manifestation starts with seeing the end, like whatever it is, and feeling it. Even more important than seeing it is feeling it. What would it feel like to be a PhD?
Right.
What would it feel like to have a routine to be at the gym every week? What would it feel like to have a finished book?
Yeah, it's interesting. In my business, I created a lot of intentions and visualized them, but it was a somewhat effortless process in that it kind of came to me, but it's a subtle kind of thing, because you're going for a goal, you have an idea, you're committing, you're getting past the barriers, and you start to see possibilities. And then for me, things, I don't know. I think it takes practice over a period of time. You just get great at manifesting stuff. But it can't be forced in any way. And I think that's an important thing. I mean, it's like, oh yeah, I see this for Ordinary Visionaries, but for me it's, well, what's just the next step this week and next week, just one thing at a time. I see sort of a big, sort of vague vision, but I don't know exactly what it's going to be. what
Mm-hmm.
Ordinary Visionaries will be like in a few years. I don't know. Maybe it will be international, maybe 1 billion people. I don't know. I can't, I don't have control over that.
Yeah.
But I can see interviewing people and getting it out there. And I don't know. I don't know if you have anything to say about that, but there's this thing about not forcing it and sort of letting it come. You know, the gates are open once the barriers aren't there, and things start to flow.
Exactly. This actually goes back to my very early training with Robert Fritz. So he's all about creating a vision. So yeah, we have a vision. It might be super crystal clear, it might not. But the other part of the dynamic is being in touch with current reality. And when you establish those two poles, you create a dynamic tension. And the vision, if it's true and real for you, is a magnet. It pulls you forward, but you don't know. We can never know what's in
Yeah.
between those two. Like that's what life brings us, you know. I used to be a planner, and that meant I was trying to fill in those blanks. And I'm not so enthusiastic about planning anymore, you know, in a small way in life, of course. But yeah, that's the mystery. That's the mystery. What happens between this is what's real now. My PhD is not finished and I can't force myself to write. And I'm a PhD and I'm working teaching at a college. We don't know what those steps are until they present themselves.
Yeah. I also found out in my early part of my career, I would have these. I read a lot of success books and Think and Grow Rich, and
Yeah.
people have been talking about this kind of stuff in various ways for decades, if not longer, maybe centuries. And I would hit against barrier after barrier after barrier, and
Mm-hmm.
uh, and this process is so valuable, I think, because it sort of breaks it down and looks at it sort of microscopically about, well, you've got to look at this part and this part and this part and sort of take it easy. And I was so frustrated that things weren't happening as fast as they could have. And
Mm-hmm.
so, but ultimately things really started to happen, because I was really committed to being successfully self-employed and helping people,
Yes.
So each of these parts is kind of a magic key. Every one of them is important and you can't do
Mm-hmm.
without any of them. So I like this stuff. So the next one is, I'm not sure what you're talking about here, but I love it because it's interesting. Activate brainwaves.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I'm going to get a little nerdy, but first I just want to respond to what you said. So, yes, this stuff's been around forever,
Yeah,
right? Buddha said,
yeah,
with our thoughts, we make the world. Well, he's on the same, he's on the
yeah,
same plane as Byron Katie, right? Like she's all about, we have to examine our thoughts, right? So an insight for me after working with this process for 20 years was that I have changed my internal narrative by practicing this regularly. Sometimes daily, sometimes weekly, sometimes monthly. Sometimes I'd go months without doing it. But over time, my
yeah.
internal narrative has changed. So, yeah. So let's talk about brainwaves. So I'll just sketch it out. There's a lot of new brain science, and I rely on that. Um, we have 4 basic brainwave patterns: beta, that we've talked about, thinking, conscious, interactive, rational. That's where we hang out a lot, most of us. The next lower, slower pattern is alpha. So we all learned about alpha when meditation hit the scene, right? Like alpha is starting to be that more relaxed, open-hearted, meditative, daydreamy kind of state. And we cycle through it
Yeah.
every day. If you find yourself kind of looking off in the distance and daydreaming, you're probably generating alpha waves. The next lower and slower is theta. Theta is, we associate it with the dream state when we're asleep and we've got rapid eye movement. That's theta. And it generates dreams, which are visions in a way, or um, processing of our, unconscious processing our daily experiences. And then the lowest and slowest is delta. And I remember that because if you think about a river delta, the river comes down and then it flows out into the sea, into the ocean, right? So it's also considered the access to the collective unconscious. If you are a fan of Jung, and I am, theta is also associated with creativity. It's associated, like if we say, oh, that came out of the blue, we're talking about theta. Or our intuition is also in the theta realm. Like when we just get an intuitive hit, we don't know where it came from. If you had an EEG running, you probably see some spikes in theta. There is a newer wave called gamma, which is the highest. It's associated with peak experiences, spiritual experiences. So the process that I teach and that we use integrates all 4 brainwave patterns simultaneously and bilaterally. So they're balanced left and right hemisphere. So I had been doing this with people in groups for years and years, and I'm a skeptic by nature. And I was experiencing profound stuff with myself and with other people, but I needed to understand it. I wanted to explain it. And I started doing some research. This has been quite a long time ago. And I ran across the work of a woman named Anna Wise, The Awakened Mind. And what she did was she used a bilateral EEG, put electrodes on people's heads, and trained them through biofeedback to generate all 4 brainwave patterns at the same time and balanced left and right. And this is what she called the awakened mind. Yeah. So I haven't had a mind mirror to measure people, but I have other evidence that this is what we get to, that we can drop into that awakened mind state. We can access theta. And because much of what we write in this process comes through like a lucid dream or allegorical or symbolic, metaphorical, but I also have evidence that we access the collective unconscious because in a group, it's not uncommon for 2 or more people to write the same phrase or come up with the same image or address each other's. So it's cool stuff.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I notice when I wake up in the morning, usually I have a lot of dreams. I wake up from a dream. But then I'm thinking about something I'm working on. And so I'm deeper than alpha at that point. I'm more in beta, maybe theta. Mm-hmm. But just ideas come to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And because I'm not interrupted by the day-to-day things and et cetera, et cetera. And then I rush to my computer and I write something down and, or in the shower, you're relaxed in the shower. So you're in a different kind of, you're just more relaxed. But, in Western society, we're so focused on, emphasize the alpha, thinking, logic, et cetera, which is very useful for solving problems. But it's not great for imagination.
Right.
You can't logically imagine. You just like dreams. Dreams are ridiculously creative. I mean, you're in outer space and you're doing this and under the sea and all the things that are impossible. But it doesn't make sense. But then all together, that can suggest something. So so there's ideas in that book to access deeper. Mm-hmm. As you say, activating deeper brainwaves.
Yes.
That's very powerful.
Yeah, it is. It is very powerful. We are very powerful beings, and we don't get a lot of support for accessing all of our power and then putting it to good use in our lives and in the world. So the a couple of different ways that I help people in a workshop is either a creative visualization that gets them into a very deep, relaxed state, or more recently, and often on Zoom, we listen to binaural beats. So binaural beats are available, in alpha, in theta, in delta, in gamma, and they're stimulating both sides of our brain, both ears and both hemispheres of the brain alternately. So it's really biofeedback. It's training us to get into that awakened mind state, and it's pretty darn effective.
How do you access these binaural beats?
Yeah, I just go to Google. Google has everything. I just go to Google and I say binaural beats theta,
Oh, yeah.
or binaural beats delta, or binaural beats alpha, and then you'll come up with, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of free YouTube clips. And it works best when you wear earbuds, because the frequencies are alternating left and right. And once you, it's like going anywhere. The first time you go to a new city, you don't know how to get around. You don't know where things are. You're going to get lost or whatever. But once you've been there and you've driven around and you've seen the sights, you know how to get back. So once you have some experience, and I believe entrainment with other people that are either me leading the workshop or other people that are regular practitioners, our brains do want to entrain with each other, and our hearts do too. Our hearts will cohere in a group, in a workshop, in a relationship, in a interaction. So once you've been there and you've done that, then it's easier to kind of take that dive.
Very interesting. This is something I've never heard of, or if I have, I forgot about it. So, yeah, it's true. You can find anything online, anything these days. Okay, so that's really stimulating. I can't wait to check that out. So the next you have is Think Bilaterally. That sort of morphs into brainwaves, it seems. So what do you mean by thinking bilaterally?
You've probably heard people say, "Oh, I'm right brain," or "I'm left brain." And it's not exactly scientific. In other words, all of us use our whole brain unless there's been some trauma, all the time. But we do have preferences. So those of us that are more logical, rational, sequential, step by step, we are, we're leaning more heavily on what's called the left brain, or those particular assets and skills in the brain. Those of us that are more imaginative and have a more visual approach to life, are more feeling based, are poets, we're more right brain. So just in, getting to know you a little bit in this interview, you're clearly both. You've talked about the step-by-step processes, and I know that what you've created in your life, but you're also very imaginative, and you pay attention to your dreams, and you're creative in that way. So this is about helping people access the whole brain, which, is always better. And if they do have a tendency to lean one way or the other, to kind of develop the other capacities. And we do that through some simple exercises, like we do a mirror writing, where we'll have a pen or pencil in each hand, and we'll write from the center of the page, write the same thing from the center of the page going out. So in order to use my right hand, my left brain has to be active. In order to use my right hand, my left brain has to be active. So, or I think I said that backwards. Both halves have to be active to do this. Michelangelo, maybe, that did mirror writing. It was either Michelangelo or Leonardo did mirror writing.
Where it was Leonardo.
He would write backwards. If you held a mirror up to the writing, you could read it. So he was exercising his non-dominant hemisphere.
Very interesting. Yeah, we underestimate how people in the distant past, what geniuses they were. I mean, whoever built the pyramids is smarter than anybody around today.
Yeah.
I tell you, things like that. Yeah. So connecting with both your right and left brain. Okay, a couple more. So engage.
Yeah, so engage is where we put it all together. So when I teach this, I try to keep this kind of walking through the steps fairly concise, particularly the brain science, because a lot of people don't care. It's, I nerd out about it. I think it's fascinating. But I get through that, and then it's time to put the pieces together and actually experience it. And so that is the engage step. And I help people to, one thing we do is we give beta mind, the thinking mind, a job to do, because most of us have a critic voice. Mine lives over here, is why I always kind of refer to this part. I have a critic voice. Most of us have a critic voice. And if we're doing something we've never done before and we're not so sure about it, the critic voice is going to be active. And that's a beta function. So we want to give beta something to do. So what jobs we give beta are to pay attention to the handwriting and write legibly, because sometimes you might want somebody else to read what you've written. We give it the job of slowing down, making sure that we write slowly. So when we're writing fast, we're activating faster brain waves. When we write slow, we activate the slower, lower, deeper brain waves. So pay attention to handwriting, write slow, pay attention to punctuation and grammar, not grammar so much, but punctuation. Be in your body in the sense that if you're writing and then all of a sudden you want to write really big, you just do that. You trust what comes through. So we give beta mind a job to do. We do the meditation, visualization, binaural beats to get people into hopefully a deeper state. And then they can do this themselves if they're working alone, but in a group, I will then, after the meditation, I will pick up a book of poetry. I like to use Rumi, Hafiz, one of our local poets, Fred Lamott, sometimes my own lines. I open it at random and I will give them a line to start their writing. Just sit there right now. Don't do a thing. Just rest. So it doesn't have anything to do with their intention. It doesn't have anything to do with any thinking they might have been doing while we're meditating. It just takes them out in left field. So what this work does, it makes the unknown known. We're not interested in what beta mind already knows. We've heard it, we've seen it, we've done it. It's old news. We want to access something new. And so that line of poetry takes us out and we write from that. And then at the end of whatever time we've decided on, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, I will call stop and we'll move into reading and integrating.
That's very interesting. I keep telling people these days that I'm watching a lot of Star Trek. I'm revisiting the Star Trek Discovery series. I watched it from the beginning, starting 7 years ago, and now I'm watching one show a day. And it's that it's all about possibility, and there's always a difficulty, and I don't know. There's something about just hearing the lines of what people are saying to each other to encourage each other. I don't know. It's somewhat related to that. It's just it just plugs me into possibility that we can work together, we can figure it out, we can solve problems, and it's I guess that's my version of Rumi or Hafiz these days is Star Trek philosophy.
Yeah.
You know, and so anything that can inspire. I listen to a lot of music, so music changes the brain waves, and
Mm-hmm.
and not really chaotic music, calming.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I have no idea what works the best, but we plug into things. I think we need to plug into things that are going in the direction we want to go. What we want to create something, we want to make a difference, we want to have harmony. So it sounds like these kinds of things are helping us do that. Is that correct?
That's absolutely true, I think. And the other thing that you said, it just reminded me of the importance of community, that when we create in community, how much more powerful that is. So I do work with people occasionally to learn the process alone. And of course, I do it alone a lot. But the juiciest, the best stuff comes when we're in community, small group, large group, online, in person, doesn't matter, it's in community. So that was kind of the Star Trek, like that way of solving problems and doing what we need to do by maximizing all of the brain power, heart power, mind power that's present.
Yeah, yeah, that's very true. Okay, the last one, number 7, is integrate.
Yeah.
So how do we integrate all of this?
Yeah. So, what I
Excellent.
find in general is that people have a hard time with integration. Like, we might learn something, we might do something, but if we don't integrate it, and by that I mean make it become part of the whole of who I am, then the value, we're not really mining it for its value. So in this case, integrate starts with reading out loud what each of us has written. And for some people, that's really risky. They, first of all, they don't know what they've written because they didn't write it from beta mind. It wasn't this, I'm thinking this and I'm writing down what I'm thinking. It's coming from someplace else. So they don't know what to expect. And often the first time, or sometimes not even the first time, people read what they've written, they cry. They hear their deepest soul voice, sometimes for the first time ever. And it is profoundly healing and transformative. So we read, and I go through a
Wow.
protocol of, you're going to read in the same way that you wrote. You're going to read slowly. There's no editorial comments. There's no editing what you wrote. You're going to read it exactly as you wrote it, starting with your intention, the opening line, and then what you wrote. And we're all going to listen in that same state of mind as much as possible in an open, receptive way. And yeah, it's remarkable. It's, if there's 3 people in the room or 10 people in the room, it's 10 souls speaking. And it's very sacred. It's not like what people experience in groups mostly. So the reading is the first step of integration. And then we start to, what I call, decode, because again, a lot of what comes, may be allegorical or like a dream. So what did you hear, for the reader? What did you hear in your piece, or what jumped out at you, or what felt most exciting, or what felt most scary? Um,
Right.
and was there a call to action? Is your voice, is your inner guidance, your divine guidance, asking something of you? So we take it apart, and people learn how to a little bit like reading poetry. I don't want to call these poems because they're not necessarily, but often the first time you read a poem, you're like, or at least I am. I'm like, I don't know what that means, or what that's about, or what this person is saying. So then I have
Right.
to drop in and I have to
Right.
read it a couple of times, right? And then I have to feel what it evokes in me. So it's not just about the brain or the mind, it's also about the body and our feeling sense. So integration is a process, and it goes on beyond. I ask them to read their pieces again on their own, and refer back to them if they felt big. Um, there might be a line in the right that points to a new intention. Um, for another rite. There might be something, again, that they're asked to do in their lives, or a change that they might want to make. I know I got, this has been a number of years ago, I got a very strong message to slow down. Well, I've been integrating that for 5 years, and I am a bit slower than I
I can
was.
relate to that one for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not that we have to be slow all the time, but sometimes really just, and then just things come. It's like a dance as opposed to,
Exactly.
So this is great stuff. So you do workshops. Do you do them virtual via Zoom, or do you do them live, or both, or?
Both. That's one of the gifts. I say that, air quotes, of COVID, was that I had never done a virtual workshop. I'd done a lot of Zoom stuff, meetings, and I tried it out in 2020, and I had about a dozen people. We also had, if you remember 2020, what a just difficult, challenging year it was in so many fronts around social justice, as far as, the George Floyd thing. And so I did a create workshop, and I called it Create Liberating Ourselves from Racism and Oppression. So I attracted a certain body of people, and many of us did write um, with those kinds of intentions, but not everybody. Some people went off on their own tangent, which was fine. And it worked beautifully on Zoom. It was remarkable. I like being in person. I still prefer that, but Zoom opened up my market. All of a sudden I had people from all over the country that could come, as opposed to my little,
Yeah.
regional area.
Yeah. So I assume you have information on your programs on your website.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
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 Okay. So we'll have your website below
Yeah,
here.
State Institute website is where I put my current workshops, and and there's some freebies out there too.
But a good place to start would probably be the book, Create! Exclamation point. I haven't read it yet. I've glanced over it. Now I'm really motivated to read it. I really am. I really. Because it's really in line with Ordinary Visionaries. Obviously, that's about creating stuff and visioning stuff and making stuff happen. And you have a pathway to do that, a blueprint for manifesting those kinds of things. So this has been really great, Joanne. Thank you so much for sharing this with us.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's been great for me too. As you can tell, I love talking about this stuff. And as far as reading the book, it's a how-to manual, so you can zoom right through it. There's some background of mine, and some science stuff, but really it's the 7 steps. So it's not a long or hard read.
Yeah. Great. So, Joanne, thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Robert. This has been delightful.